We don't do that, so I don't think we do that, so she likes it.
What's the electricity city called?
Yeah.
And then there's litigation.
Yeah. Oh, so. Yeah, but there's a reasons there's a power wall. Great stuff for girls. That's it. Yeah. I'm still racing you know what's going Yeah, yeah.
Okay, welcome to First Universalist of New Madison on this pleasant summer day. Wish the whole summer could be like this, but I think it's going to get warmer at the end of the week. Do we have any announcements? Kenny has another bid for the sidewalk, a much lower bid. So maybe we can have a quick meeting after church and vote by acclamation to accept that, unless someone has an objection, and we'll get started on the sidewalk. This one is more in line with what I would suggest the price should be, so I'm happy to see that. And one announcement I saw today on Capital Journal, the anti-gerrymandering vote will be on the ballot for this November. There was enough signatures to get that on the ballot. So the anti-gerrymandering is a thing that says Republicans can't just jam through whatever they want to make the districts look like how they want them to look.
As they did last time, despite 7 vance court.
And the Supreme Court, which is the Republican Supreme Court, voting against them, and they ignored the Supreme Court, which we will get into too. That's a quote from J.D. Vance. If the election goes against them and they throw out the election and the Supreme Court rules against Trump, J.D. Vance says, let the Supreme Court enforce their rules. So we'll see where that takes us. Also, Stephen, I can't remember his last name, the pastor or the speaker we had here a few months ago that Derek recommended, asked to speak again, so he's on for next week. He'll hopefully send me his information and we'll go through there. And I've been asking Derek, yes.
I'm sorry, who did you say speaking next week?
Remember the Stephen that we had here a few months ago, the guest speaker? And he spoke primarily about his history and who he was, and which is fine for introductory, but we want to get some meat on the bones as we go along. So we'll see how we get along this time. But anyway, he's a recommendation from Derek. And I've been asking Derek, his husband is speaking now, and I'd really like to get him here. He has some pretty interesting topics. He's been pretty busy in the past, so we'll see if we can't get him here. And anybody has any suggestions, feel free. Monday is 2 weeks on my hip. This one is like 10 times worth. The other one, I was out walking around with no trouble after 3 days. My leg is still 2 times its normal size. Last week it was 3 times its normal size. And I don't know what's going on, so I'm going to be quizzing the doctor when I see the doctor for the follow-up Tuesday. We'll see. There's no redness, no drainage. I don't think there's no real pain. It's just like walking around with a tree stump tight to your leg. I mean, it's just really uncomfortable. So, also, how many people saw the Eddie Oakley parade yesterday? Were you there? Not many people. I was surprised. I drove the Democratic float, which was interesting. They said it was because we hadn't had a float there in the past, but we were like third from the end of the parade. They said that wasn't because we were Democrats, it's just because we were hadn't had one there before, and first come, first serve.
I was at the end of Broadway, and it seemed like there was about the same number of people along the street there. You're talking about the whole path.
Yeah, well, there's about the same number on the whole path. People sat out in front of their houses.
Yeah.
And, there was plenty of people through there.
Yeah.
But I'm used to on Broadway, if anybody has ever been to the Christmas horse parade,
Yeah.
I mean, they're like 5 deep
Yeah.
along the whole length of Broadway and
Yeah.
all the way around the circle.
Yeah.
And by the time we stopped in the middle of the circle, and all the kids, because the Democratic thing, the candidates were there handing out candy, and the candidates were there to shake hands and meet people. Everybody piled in the back of the pickup truck, and we took all the signs off there and stopped right in the middle of Broadway. And, there wasn't any hold up at all. So, and I think Mike was at Garst. Did you work at Garst, Mike, or volunteer at Garst?
I did,
And Garst is still going on, so.
yeah, and today, yeah, that's right.
Yes, so I would highly recommend, if you have time, I would be there if I can walk, so. And I'll be danged if I'm gonna ride around in a wheelchair again, so. I'll be there next year. And I think Garst, the museum, I think the repairs have been made and they've opened up the other.
Yes, the old Thomaston exhibit at the Americana, we are both open.
Yes.
After roof reconstruction.
Yep. So, and that's a very worthwhile visit if you haven't been to Garst in a while, because it changes as it goes along. They also have an exhibit on the Black Village on the other side of Ohio, the other side of the county. Longtown.
They have just opened about back in late spring. Lewis and Clark exhibit 2 large displays that were locally funded on Lewis and Clark, and they're in the treaty room.
Right. So it's just a really worthwhile place to go. And the gathering is fun. They've got cannons going off and people dressed in costume and all kinds of interesting stuff, plus interesting food. So I highly recommend that.
I got a call from Gordon Patty one day this past week. Was inquiring about the church closing and all. I told him what we're in the process of doing. He was commenting, he's still a friendship village, but it's got new owners, and it sounds like he's going to be moving and he's got to be a little closer to here. So not sure where he's talking about and everything. I said keep in touch.
Is he interested in keeping in touch with us?
Sound that way, yeah.
Oh,
Because-
that's great to hear.
Yeah.
I went down there, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and I took a video. Well, I showed him the video of one of the things, and I said, do you want me to hook up your computer so you can be church with us? Or he didn't sound like he was very interested in continuing, like he made new connections down there. But, we're more than welcome. He's more than, and I'd be more than willing to get him connected in.
Find out where he's going to be moving if he's.
Did you say friendship was closing?
Huh?
Friendship
is new ownership, yeah. And the way it sounds, he's going to be moving somewhere, and he's other people closer to me. Inglewood, perhaps, who knows? So,
That's good to hear.
Inglewood's where Dolly is, and it's
I can't understand what you're saying.
And you can bet when there's new ownership of a retirement village or a nursing home or anything else, things don't get better, they get worse.
yeah.
Because the new owners want to make more money, and they squeeze staffing, they squeeze supplies, they squeeze even what the food the people get to eat. It's pretty pathetic, and I think we've talked about this before. If you have someone who you know or is a relative in a nursing home, the best thing you can do is visit as often as you can, because the residents who get visits and the caregivers know that they get visits, and the caregivers know that somebody is watching them. There's not enough attention to go around for everybody, so the people that get the attention are the ones who have someone that will speak up for them. The sad cases are the ones who are placed there on Medicaid, who have no family. They're the ones who are at the bottom end of the totem pole and are literally abused in many cases. When I was in the nursing home, and when I was going to nursing school, they told us we had to have 7 people up and dressed and ready for breakfast by 7 o'clock. You weren't supposed to get people awake until 6 o'clock. But you can't get 7 people who have handicaps and are limited in their movement. There's no way you can dress 7 people in an hour. So these people, the other aides, would start, and I would just say I can't get it done, and they would give me a hard time. But the other aides would start at 3 o'clock in the morning. They would have a resident. They would sit with a resident who had nobody that could speak for them, who was nonverbal, who would basically, they had to be fed at the table. They were dressed and sitting in a wheelchair, in a diaper, and their diaper didn't get changed till after breakfast, so they sat there from 3 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock in the morning when they were taken back to their room and their diaper was changed. So they sat in a wet at least a couple hours. That happened over and over again. That was the most distressing thing that I have ever seen. Is the healthcare industry. I just saw information, a bit of information today. Universal healthcare is so hard to do that out of the 33 nations, the 33 advanced nations in the world, only 32 of them have managed to do universal healthcare. 32 out of 33. What's the one country that doesn't have universal health care? United States. And we purport to say that we care about our children, we care about our elderly, we respect our parents, but our money is not where our mouth is. All right, we're going on here. Prelude, my shepherd will supply my needs. My shepherd. The light within us. We light our chalice as a symbol of the light within us and the life that flows through the world around us. It is our beacon as we search for truth. It is the warmth in our hearts for love, and it is the energy that propels us to action. May we be kindled by our time together. Opening hymn is number 1. May nothing evil cross this door. Very appropriate. May they be strong to keep hate out and hold love in. Our affirmation is your hands, the ones that you are holding together in prayer or desperation or hope, the ones with the tiny scar you carried since that bicycle accident all those years before, the ones that today may shake with worry or sit still from the gravity of headlines. Those hands, your hands, there is something to remember, a needful thing to remember about your hands. That they are the same hands that petted the cool, slick back of the kitten on its first day, the same ones that flattened the crumpled edges of a construction paper heart after the glue came unstuck, the same hands that just last night pulled your family's patchwork under the chin of your youngest as you whispered, "It's going to be okay," and wanted it to be so. The same hands that offered, in the simplest gesture of gift giving, tissue to a stranger who, tears streaking her face, asked, "Why? Why?" Addressed not to you, but to God. Asked of a world whose glue has come unstuck. They are the same hands that give the world its most needful thing. You know its most needful thing. You know because your hands have always given it, always offered or tried to offer the kindest touch, exactly when it was hoped for. And you know nothing can change that, right? Nothing can take away the brilliant, beautiful power of hands God gave you, not to pull a trigger, but to proclaim the softness of the world. Nothing can annul the kindness of your touch. There is power in your hands, the power of a kindness that beckons to remake the world always as though this were its first day. I forgot to mention, we're talking about Roberta's bringing the message, and it's an article she's picked up from the New York Times, correct? Which we're lucky that Roberta still gets the New York Times. We tried to get it at the library, and the New York Times finally said they won't even deliver I used to get it at my house, and they quit delivering there. And then they said they would take it to the library in New Madison, and then they quit delivering there. So
It's still printed.
it's still printed paper. And Roberta has a charmed, I think maybe a relation, who could pull strings and get the New York Times delivered to little old Greenville, Ohio. So we're grateful for that. But she's speaking on J.D. Vance. And we talked about J.D. a little bit before. Hillbilly Elegy is the book that brought him to prominence. And if you know what elegy means, elegy is a sorrowful poem written about the decline or the disappearance or the downfall of a family, a civilization, a community, whatever. So the Hillbilly Elegy is Vance's take on what happened to the Appalachian history. He grew up in Middletown, and some people say his reporting and his portrayal may reflect his upbringing, but doesn't necessarily reflect an accurate portrayal of the Appalachian life. So that's why we got J.D. Vance. And I showed this last week. I'll show it to you again. J.D. Vance, the prominent Christian standing for Christian nationalism. Christianity is the religion of the country. Has married a Hindu wife and was married in a Hindu ceremony. And she took lots of flack for that. And his response was, everybody has the right to their opinion. Not exactly a ferocious defense of his Hindu wife, his Indian wife. And then the other one was this quote on this side. Vance wrote, "Fellow Christians, everyone is watching us when we apologize for this man. Lord help us." This was before he became a sycophant of Trump. This was when he was using his own brain and his own mind. So. Project 2025 is something that we'll be paying more attention to as we go along.
Project 2025 has something to do with doing away with the electoral code.
Well, maybe we're not gonna go through.
That's all.
If it doesn't play, we'll get it figured out. We'll play it again. All right, we'll see what happens there. This was, if you watch the late night TV, late night comedians are your best source of information on what's going on. The broadcast news, if you watch at 6:30, they are limited in what they can say because they still adhere, at least the main stations do. Fox doesn't, but the main stations adhere. So you don't say anything unless you can prove it, and you don't say things that are scurrilous or attacking anyone. Try and stay in the middle ground and try not to offend anyone. The late night comedians have no such limitations on what they do, so you'll get the unvarnished appearance of what's really there. And I spend a lot of time with them, and this one was a really good construct. So if we don't get it today, we'll get it again. Joys and concerns. Ukraine, we still have our sunflowers. If you've heard it, and part of what the Project 2025 is a statement that, and Viktor Orban, the premier of Hungary, was just here and visited the president and the vice president, Kamala Harris, and then he went to see Trump and had a much more friendly and engaging meeting with Trump at Mar-a-Lago than he did with the president, because Viktor Orban is a spokesperson for Putin. He says that the EU is totally mistaken. They should give up on the Ukraine, that Putin is right, and the future of the universe, the future of the world lies in the East. He is aligning himself with Russia and with China. I think more with China than Russia, because China is the growing power. And my question is, why does the EU permit him to, basically, he's created a totalitarian state in Hungary. There is no free press. There is no opposition party. He does whatever he wants to do. And that is the pattern that our conservatives are following here. So, Ukraine could be in a world of hurt if Trump wins. They will be abandoned to the Russians. Yes.
I can also for Palestinians and to continue basically destroying the country, loss of life, starvation, constant mobility of moving from one to another. And let us not forget Israeli hostages as well. But the conflict is yet to be resolved.
Netanyahu was just here, got a standing ovation from the conservatives in the legislature. President Biden raised the issue of getting the hostages back. There is the Hamas has come to a basic agreement, and the holdup now is Netanyahu doesn't want to have an agreement because he wants to continue attacking the West Bank. The hospital was just hit again, more than 30 more people killed, or over 38,000 Palestinians are killed, and the numbers are obvious. They're 90% or 80% are non-combatants. They're women and children and old people, old men. They're not people that are shooting the Israelis. They're people that are killed when they bomb the hospital. The Israelis had suffered an attack from Hezbollah in Lebanon. I think 12 or 13 were killed on a soccer field, just young kids. And already Israel is attacking Lebanon with aerial strikes. And the damage will be much higher than that. All right. Anything else? I'm sure there are many more things that we could raise. Hope Dolly's doing well on her trip. Hopefully she's on her ship. I didn't get a hold of Cecil. I was kind of preoccupied this week. She was supposed to be here last week, and I didn't hear from her. Has anybody heard from Cecil? Our thoughts are with Cecil, and we'll call her after church and see if we can't figure out what's going on. And I can make an appointment with Uber today to bring her next week if she's willing to come. So we'll do our best to get her here. All right, the final candle is all those thoughts, those fears, as we talked about with the hands, the little statement on hands. Sometimes you think of, sometimes you don't. Sometimes they just work in the back of your mind. But if you need help, we are here to help as best we can. All right, Roberta and J.D. Vance.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. My daughter Lisa knows many of the people quoted and mentioned here. And she lives in the steel town that shaped J.D. Vance's life and politics. And my granddaughter Maggie had been asked out on a date by J.D. Vance, and she turned him down big time. But she is the same age as J.D. Vance. They went to school together in Middletown. Okay. The Ohio steel town that shaped J.D. Vance's life and politics. His memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, told the down-at-the-heels story of Middletown, Ohio. It's a depiction that has stuck. Middletown, Ohio, a small city of tree-lined streets surrounding a sprawling steel mill, seems as far from the towering skyscrapers of New York as it gets. But on Monday, they were suddenly linked. Donald Trump, a real estate heir, tapped Middletown's most famous son, J.D. Vance, as his running mate. Millions of people first learned of Middletown from Hillbilly Elegy, Mr. Vance's best-selling memoir, and the Hollywood movie that followed. Have any of you read his book or seen the movie? Good, I did too. Mr. Vance, 39, wrote about his chaotic upbringing in Middletown. He was raised in the intermittent care of a single mother struggling with addiction. In his depiction, Middletown was, quote, little more than a relic of American industrial glory, a place which was hemorrhaging jobs and hope. His bleak portrait of the city just north of Cincinnati was initially held up as reference guide for urbanites on the coast, desperate to understand Mr. Trump's appeal among the struggling white working class. Mr. Vance's explanation was a stark one. Some of Middletown's woes were caused by the damaging decisions of government and big business, but the deeper problems lay in the fatalism, indolence, and victim mentality of the city's white working class. The problems in his community run far deeper than microeconomic trends and policy, Mr. Vance wrote in his book. There is a lack of agency here, a feeling that you have little control over your life, and a willingness to blame everyone but yourself. I'm still talking about Middletown. When Mr. Vance's grandparents moved to Middletown in the 1940s, the city was in what most people say were its golden years. It has begun to stabilize after decades of decline and was at its lowest point in the years that Mr. Vance chronicled. Some people in the nicer parts of town thought Mr. Vance had been unfair, said Jason Moore, 39, a truck driver who was a year behind Mr. Vance in high school. But, he said, people in this part of town would say he nailed it. When Mr. Vance's grandparents moved to Middletown from eastern Kentucky in the 40s, the city was in what most people say were its golden years. A half-dozen paper mills ran alongside the Armco steel mill, and the business owners lived in grand houses in town, bankrolling cultural festivities and a local symphony. There are still some pretty grand houses in Middletown. Most of the steel workers there, a mix of first and second generation European immigrants, black families who had moved up from the deep south, and white families from Appalachia, were represented by an independent and locally run union. Middletown was, as Look magazine declared in 1937, an all-American city, and many of the residents there thought of it that way. Mr. Vance's grandfather, who worked at the mill, had been among those who found a foothold of economic security in Middletown, moving his family into a two-story house across from a neighborhood park. But that stability was fleeting. Mr. Vance's mother had a child as a teenager. She divorced and remarried, and in 1984 gave birth to Mr. Vance, just as the city's prosperity was beginning to founder. I have pictures of the steel mill here, which you probably can't see, but I do have some pictures. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, the U.S. steel industry collapsed across the Midwest. The Middletown Steelworks were no exception. In 1985, Armco's corporate leadership decamped for the East Coast, draining Middletown City of money, while the steel mill went through round after round of layoffs. Those who kept their jobs, some former employees said, found it an ever more miserable and more dangerous place to work. Middletown struggled. Government-subsidized rentals began proliferating in the empty houses at a rate the city's social services were not equipped to handle. Shopping centers were boarded up, and the city pools were filled with concrete. Many residents turned to drugs, including Mr. Vance's mother, who became addicted to narcotics. Her life became erratic as she cycled among boyfriends, and Mr. Vance sought refuge with Mama, his hard-edged but protective grandmother. This was the Middletown Mr. Vance knew in his childhood. That was how most of us lived, said Rodney Mooterspaw, 55, who spent decades on the city's police force, 5 of them as the police force chief. Mr. Mooterspaw went on to describe some of the larger context of the city's distress. He recalled with regret that law enforcement responded to the growing drug epidemic by focusing disproportionately on low-income neighborhoods. And he remembered being sent as a police officer to monitor locked-out workers picketing the steel mills, essentially ordered, he said, to pay on our dads, our brothers, our uncles. Once an all-American city, Middletown appeared to have turned against itself. I've never seen a city that loves to hate itself as much as Middletown does, Rodney Mooterspaw, a former police chief, said. Various attempts to lift the city's fortune failed, reinforcing a pessimism among many residents. In his book, Mr. Vance mentioned that efforts to revive the downtown were futile, a cynicism about government intentions that is far from rare. I've never seen a city that loves to hate itself as much as Middletown does, Mr. Mooterspaw said. Some of Mr. Vance's teachers did not recall any signs of Mr. Vance's struggles at home, though by high school he wrote in his memoir that he had found some stability living with his grandmother there. At least one teacher remembered his growing political consciousness. His grasp and understanding of government and politics was extraordinary, said Mike Stratton, 70, who taught Mr. Vance's advanced placement English class at Middletown High School. When class discussion turned to politics, Mr. Stratton recalled, Mr. Vance was an outspoken Republican. He supported local government and then President George W. Bush. Mr. Vance's views were fairly standard Republican fare at the time, said Mr. Stratton, a Democrat. Middletown was a hotbed of conservative Republicanism back then, but J.D. Vance was a moderate. Mr. Stratton said that these days, Mr. Vance's political rhetoric with his hard right populism seems quite different from what he heard in his classroom more than 2 decades ago. In Middletown, Many buildings are still boarded up. But things are improving, with real retail opening up in downtown Middletown. And Lisa tells me there are some new stores moving in. Mr. Vance graduated from high school in 2003, when the city was still at its nadir, and he joined the Marines. He built from there, degrees from Ohio State and Yale Law School, a job at a Silicon Valley venture capital firm, election to the U.S. Senate, and now a place on a presidential ticket. This rapid rise was fueled in large part by the success of his book, Hillbilly Elegy. Have any of you read his book, Hillbilly Elegy?
I have.
I have too, Mike. The book contributed his community's woes in large part on a culture that increasingly encourages social decay instead of counteracting it. Mr. Vance speaks differently now, blaming the ills of his community on immigration and elites, a far more populist tone. I have a picture of Mr. Vance's home in Middletown if you're interested to see it when I'm finished. Last year, after a freight train carrying hazardous chemicals derailed and burned in the industrial town of East Palestine, Ohio, Mr. Vance excoriated the, quote, bi-coastal elite, saying that they use places like East Palestine for cheap propaganda, while reserving their sympathy for Ukrainians, extreme sexual minorities, and criminals. That was Mr. Vance's quote. Elites, Mr. Vance said, ignored the fact that their prosperity was only possible because of heartland labor, heartland sweat, and heartland heroin. That labor never stopped in Middletown, even in the grim years that Mr. Vance described in his book. The steel mill's current owner, Cleveland Cliffs, announced this spring that it was investing nearly $2 billion to upgrade the plant, with $500 million of that coming through a grant from the Biden administration. The plan was cheered by the local attempts to turn the city's fortunes around have continued, and some major projects have gotten underway, including Renaissance Point, described as a $200 million epicenter for stores, restaurants, and hotels. That is in the city of Middletown. But reversing 4 decades of declining fortune is hard work. Downtown, there are brew pubs and a wine bar, but also plenty of empty storefronts. Amy Victori, 50, left Middletown after high school, but she came back in 2015 and in recent years has renovated an abandoned building downtown, attracting a restaurant, retail, and even a boutique hotel. Mr. Vance praised her efforts in a 2017 New York Times opinion piece, which explained his decision to run to Ohio and open a nonprofit. But I don't know where that was to be. That nonprofit has since folded, and Mr. Vance now lives in Cincinnati. He is married and has 3 children. Vance left Middletown behind a long time ago, Ms. Vittori said. To her, his interest in his hometown nowadays seems limited to using it as a symbol of what he has become. George Lang, a Republican state senator who represents Middletown, pushed back on that notion. He pointed out that Mr. Vance had announced his 2022 run for Senate in the city and also opened his regional Senate office there. Quote, "The most important thing he can do for Middletown," Mr. Lang said, "is be the example that he is." Given Mr. Vance's ongoing rise to prominence, Ms. Vittori said she hoped for more. "I hope he's honestly done what he's had to do to get where he is," she said. "And once he's there, he may actually try to do some good for people in places like Middletown." That is it. I really liked reading this, and I hope the rest of you enjoyed hearing it. Are there any expressions of anything?
Well, thank you. There were some things in there I didn't know about JD, so very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. I am going to hang on to this.
Seems like he's using demographics, particularly past demographic data from Middletown to his advantage and to their unfair advantage. And what he wrote in his book, in my experience, you may recall, I worked 10 years in the Franklin City Schools right next door to Middletown. I was very familiar with the population there. And a lot of what he said explained very much what I dealt with as an educator in the Franklin schools. It was so well explained. I really thanked him repeatedly as I was reading the book. I wish I had understood it before that when I was working there. But a lot of it, I think, he has stretched a bit to his advantage, even when he wrote the book, in my opinion, but now even more importantly, now that he has received the vice presidential nomination.
Right. Well, and Maggie still growls about it. Maggie, my granddaughter, still growls about it.
Middletown's an interesting community.
Well, my family has lived there a long time.
Thank you, Roberta, and this is a topic we will return to many more times as the election is coming up. And as you know, it is legal for churches to inquire into the background, the facts, and the understanding of who the candidates are. We're not allowed to espouse an attraction or a support for one candidate for another, so we will not do that. But this presentation in the New York Times is pretty sanitized. Just one little tidbit I discovered in my research online. His grandparents, when they moved to Middletown, his grandmother was 13 years old and pregnant, and his grandfather was 16. And the reason AK Steel was so successful in those days was the work ethic of the imported immigrants and the Appalachian workers that came up. They worked hard, they didn't complain, and they made AK Steel the success that it was. When AK Steel started to go downhill was when, as Roberta mentioned, all the management moved to the East Coast and abandoned the city of Middletown. When you have the people that have the most money, pay the most taxes, are the most involved in civic endorsement, those are the people whose wives go to the charity clubs and help people out. When those people abandon the town, it gets tougher for the town to succeed. We all know that. So there's a bunch more stuff that we'll be presenting as we go along. It's not a very pretty picture. Hillbilly Elegy is an accurate portrayal of a portion of the Appalachian population. He said things like, 30% or 40% of the people don't even work 20 hours a week. They just wander around the streets. There is a reason for that. He also said that women should be at home and pregnant. Actually, let me show you. How many of you are aware of the cat lady quotes he's made? J.D. Vance said that all the Democratic leaders, not all of them, but most of them, and all the liberals in America are cat ladies. They don't have kids, they have cats. Basically, the men deserve the jobs, and women should be producing children. You're not a real, in fact, he even said, and this is factual, that the vote should be given to children. So if you're a parent and you have 4 kids, when you go to the polls, your young kids, a year old, 10 years old, 5 years old, they can't vote. So you as the parent should be able to vote for them. So if you've got 4 kids and you go to the polls, you get to vote 5 times. This is an actual quote from J.D. Vance. The things, and this is this Project 2025, the things that are being said are incredible. How many of you heard Donald Trump's quote last night or 2 nights ago to the religious gathering that he was at. Religious people, you need to vote this year, and if you're successful and I'm elected, you won't have to worry about voting again. You won't have to worry about voting again. I mean, people tell you what they're going to do, and it's up to us.
He's going to stay in power forever.
Yes, and there won't be any more votes. People, you have to listen to what people tell you. They tell you this right to your face. You have to listen to what they say. He said, I'm going to be a dictator on day one. And then he laughed and said, only for day one. How many dictators do you know took over the country and then said, oh, I'm giving up the country. I won't be a dictator anymore.
Yeah.
Cincinnatus in 3020 BC or something in Rome became a dictator for a day, saved Rome, and went back to his farm. George Washington, they promised him he could be king, and he said, you're crazy. This country doesn't, we fought a revolution to get rid of kings. And he, even though the congressional legislature offered him another term, he said no, and went back to his farm at Mount Vernon. Joe Biden, whether he was under pressure or not, said, my candidacy is hurting this country, and if Donald Trump wins, it'll be my fault. So I'm voluntarily giving up my run for the president. And Joe Biden, no matter what anybody knows, is a very ambitious person. He's been in politics his entire life. Kind of reminds me of Governor DeWine. He went from job to job to job, always a government job. All right, I go on too long again. Our offering. If you have something to contribute, please do. If you need something, please let us know. And we're going to hear It Had to Be You. Closing hymn is number 10, Immortal Love. Move through the world in love. We extinguish this flame, but not its meaning and its mission in our hearts. Our time together has come to an end. Go in peace, be of service to one another, and may you move through the world in love for all of your days. Our final picture is Appalachian logging with horses. I had some pictures which I may bring up in the future. There was a logging car with 2 horses, and there were like 50 logs on it, the size of this one. I don't know whether that was a joke, because I can't imagine 2 horses could pull that, so I'm going to do a little research before I bring that up. But I saw a couple of those pictures. The postlude is, I only have eyes for you. What a nice way to end the service.
Yeah.
All right, we'll have our final candle, which will remain lit in our hearts for Cecil, Gordon, and Dolly, our absent members. We'll see if we can get a hold of Cecil, and we'll see if we can figure out what's going on with Gordon. If he's interested in any connection, we'd be more than happy to establish that. So there are donuts back there. They've been in the freezer for a while, but they still should be good.
I see your picture down there. You were in the Army, right?
What?
Needed to. They are heavy. So you're used to they're heavy. I read 2 sections, 5 for a valley, but there's 5 2 squares. I guess we just because we put it out there, that's such a bright day. Those 4 squares were 5 right all day from 10.
Okay, so it's going to cost $2,800
There.
and this guy becomes $650.
That's close to emergency.
That's who did one once. I was stuck with that. I got four things. I had to tear out all the cars, so it's all like,
This is about 50 feet, I think, so linear feet. He's not getting it.
I'd say, information on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think. And he was down here, I showed him